Hey there, Deluxe fans. Hope you're feeling particularly magical today. As you all know, one of Disney's most recent films, Encanto, became an instant hit following its release around Thanksgiving of 2021. Not only did fans immediately fall in love with the story and the characters of the movie, but some of the songs from the soundtrack managed to gain popularity equal to that of Let It Go. Songs like We Don't Talk About Bruno or Surface Pressure became instant classics that rivaled some of the best Disney songs in existence. Now, despite the overwhelming popularity of the film, the concept of a sequel is still very uncertain, even though it was created by some of the best minds in Hollywood, such as Lin-Manuel Miranda, who worked on the soundtrack, or the directors Jared Bush and Byron Howard. There has been no word about whether or not Disney is planning on working on a sequel film. This hasn't stopped fans from demanding an Encanto 2, though, with many of them coming up with their own theories as to where the story can go following the ending of the first film. In today's video, we're going to be exploring all of the information that we have about a possible sequel, as well as going over some ideas for where the plot might find itself going in the near future. Now, as we all know, the more that a movie makes in the box office, the more likely it's going to get a sequel. Encanto was the 60th film from the Walt Disney Animation Studios, and it was centered around the character Mirabel. Mirabel was the only member of the Madrigal family who was not granted a magical gift when she hit a certain point in her childhood. This immediately made Mirabel the outcast in the family, whether they wanted her to feel that way or not. Over time, Mirabel, as she was trying her best to fit in, began to discover the family's history and learns that their magical casita was in danger. It was up to Mirabel to not only save her home, but also fix her family that couldn't see how broken it was. The film immediately topped the charts, with the music in the film being absolutely praised by almost every critic. Many people really enjoyed that the movie focused on a lot of the individual lives of each of the characters and intertwined them into a single plot. It touched the hearts of every audience member as it subtly touched on the point of dysfunctional families concealing their flaws instead of facing them and working to be better. Fans also couldn't help but notice that Disney took a note from Pixar's storytelling by not having a specific villain in the film. No one in Encanto was the bad guy, but instead the characters had to work through problems that affected them mentally and emotionally. Now, the sad thing is, even with all the praise Encanto received, and rightfully deserved, it still had a rather underwhelming success, at least commercially speaking. At the time of its release in theaters, Encanto only managed to pull in a little more than $200 million at the box office worldwide before Disney cross-released it onto Disney+. That's not too bad though, especially when you consider the timing. People were still wary of going to theaters, and seating was still very limited due to the pandemic. This meant that ticket sales were particularly low all throughout 2021. Not to mention that Encanto was released onto Disney's streaming service only a month after being in theaters. I personally loved that, but it might have hurt Disney's wallet a little bit. But that's all right, they still have the cheddar to keep Mickey Mouse happy. At the end of the day, Encanto was the highest-grossing animated film of the year 2021, even if the numbers might have seemed small. Couple that with the massive impact that the movie had on its fans, many people can't wait for news about Encanto 2. So here's what we know so far. As of the time that we're making this video, the studio and Disney haven't made any official announcements about Encanto 2, or whether or not it's even being talked about. Don't be too concerned though, this doesn't mean that they have thrown out the idea or the possibility of another Encanto film. Disney has never been a company to shy away from a sequel when it came to their animated successes, from their classics like Lion King 2 and Aladdin 2 and 3, to even their newer successful franchises like Frozen. So if Disney was planning on following their own pattern, the success of Encanto has likely earned it at least the possibility of them producing an Encanto 2. The biggest downside to that is the fact that even if the film were announced today, it would likely take a while for it to be finished and fully produced. In our opinion, which is the same as a lot of fans out there, it would seem nearly impossible for them to turn down an Encanto 2. With the amount of love it's receiving from fans, and the fact that multiple songs from the musical have trended on musical platforms across the board from Spotify to YouTube, it would almost be like losing money if the studio turned it down. And no one likes to lose money, meaning that the future of Encanto 2 is wide open, without a doubt. And not only that, but the way they ended Encanto set them up for so many different avenues when it comes to different plot structures for a second installment. In fact, the best part of Encanto 2 is that the ending of the first film left it open enough for there to be endless possibilities. And at the end of Encanto, we saw the Madrigal family beginning to thrive again after learning about their own personal weaknesses as well as their weakness as a family. We saw this as Mirabel exposed the toxicity that was being created by the familial and generational pressure. And then we further saw as she helped her family pick up up the pieces, both figuratively and literally. Through the help of Mirabel and her gift, the family was able to rebuild their house and form bonds with one another leagues deeper than they had before. This allowed the magic to return to the Madrigals, and with each of the family members now realizing their own personal values and self-worth and further considering themselves even stronger. This ending left a lot to be considered by fans, and it also opened up an entirely new path of growth for each of the members of the Madrigal family. And with such a neatly tied up yet open ending, fans have come to a lot of theories and ideas for where the plot of Encanto sequel could go. One possibility that fans have been talking about is the idea that Encanto 2 might see the conquerors come back. Only this time, the mountain wouldn't be there to protect the villagers, and they would have a whole new area to plunder. This, of course, would involve the Madrigal family learning to face the people that chased them from their hometown and murdered their abuelo. The idea of the family learning to overcome not only their own personal obstacles, but also figuring out how to band together and face an enemy the likes of which only Alma had ever seen before. It would also be really neat to see how Abuela Alma would react to having to face the people that chased her and her babies away from their home. She would likely have to overcome intense fear, and we might even see her character break a little bit, but with the help of Mirabel and the rest of her family, would come through in the end. Another possibility might see Mirabel leaving her home and her family to see who she is in the rest of the world. This would allow her to focus on her own life and figure out what her greater purpose is, while also keeping her from dwelling on what the next generation of Madrigals would be like. She wouldn't have to worry about being compared to any of her family or their gifts if she were to head out on her own, now that she has the ability to, ever since the mountain pass opened up again. Or perhaps it would be the opposite, with Mirabel away from home, but maybe the film itself would revolve around the next generation of Madrigals. This would involve possibly following Antonio as the central character, or perhaps even a Madrigal that hadn't been born yet in the original film. It would allow us to explore the life of a Madrigal with an apparent gift, and could possibly see a member of the family going down a darker path and needing to be saved by a member of the new generation of gift holders. This would allow the creators of Encanto to do what they do best and design a wonderful character for their fans to adore and relate to. I, along with most people who saw Encanto, loved each and every one of the characters, so the idea of adding more members to the family is certainly one that I could get behind. While we're considering possible time jumps, another interesting theory for Encanto 2's plot could involve a massive one. Perhaps years have passed and some of the family members have drifted apart. Some Madrigals decided to leave their home in the mountains, while others decided to stay in their home and continue their traditions. This could cause a gap or a divide between the two sets of Madrigals, and a time jump might see them all have to reunite during a time of tragedy or crisis. Perhaps the Madrigals that left continued to grow their families, only without the candle and casita, their children wouldn't have gifts. That could make for an interesting dynamic in a possible sequel. There's also the idea to consider a sequel that continues to follow Mirabel, only maybe a few years down the line after Abuela Alma passes away. With her death, Mirabel might see herself as the head of the Madrigal family, considering she was the one who held them all together and saved their family in a time of crisis. Only she wouldn't really know how to deal with the people in town or her family like her abuela did. The movie could see her struggle as she learned how to be the matriarch of the Madrigals in her own way. We also think it might be fun to see a prequel, maybe even in the form of an animated short that delves a bit into the short but happy life that Pedro and Alma got to spend together before his sad demise. Or maybe even a series of animated shorts that follows each of the Madrigal family members around for a day. For instance, a day in the life of Camille. That would be a fun way for Disney to give the audience a bit more insight into their favorite characters and their personalities when they aren't in La Casita. There are truly endless possibilities when it comes to the world of Encanto and where Disney can go with it. All we know is that if Disney does decide to prioritize Encanto 2, we're all here for it. Now, as far as a release date's concerned, if they were to consider doing a sequel to Encanto, it might be tough to zero in on. But if we take a look at the release pattern of the first film, along with how Disney has produced their movies in the past, we can work out a rough estimate. When it comes to how long it took for the first film to come out, it could actually clue us in on the length of time we'd have to wait for the second to reach its completion. It's been said that Lin-Manuel Miranda decided that he wanted to create a movie that was centered around Latin American life. This would end up growing into the idea of Encanto. The idea of the film was picked up by Disney and Miranda along with the directors, and they began working on a movie that would largely be based on the perspective of family. After the plot of the film was created and the movie was written, the casting process began. And then finally it was time for the production process. The animation process for Encanto is said to have required nearly 500 artists to work on the film. This is something that they would have to take into account for a sequel. Not only would they have to take their time coming up with a solid plot for the sequel that holds up to the first film, but they would also have to get together a team of nearly 500 100 or more animators. So even if Encanto 2 were announced today, we likely wouldn't be seeing any sign of a release until 2024 at the earliest. And that's if a miracle happens. And just like Mirabel, I'm waiting on a miracle. Now, considering the fact that the first Encanto was released in theaters in November of 2021, and movie studios tend to follow a pattern when it comes to releases, it wouldn't be surprising to hear that when Encanto 2 is announced, the release date will probably be around the holidays. Despite having to wait, it's almost certain that a sequel to Encanto will be released in some way or another, and when it does, we will all rejoice. But when they do finally announce the sequel, what do you think the plot's going to be about? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. As for now, that's all, Disney fans. Let us know what video you'd like to see next in the comments, and like and subscribe for more magically packed videos.